Okay. La 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 la. Another day, another dollar. Another 3 Cage films of varying quality. Mostly bad. Or mid at best. Little medicinal Dr. Pepper. See, let me let you in on a little secret. It wouldn't be called Dr. Pepper if it wasn't good for you. Why would that be bad for you? It's clearly good for you. I gargle about a half can of this every night before bed, and it personally helps my digestion, helps my cognition in the morning. So I'd recommend, taking some Dr. Pepper in your life. Makes you feel better. All right, where were we? Nicolas Cage-athon, episode 6. It's going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but episode 6 is a lot like the other episodes in that there's going to be some more ham-fisted attempts at telling a movie, ham-fisted attempts at making movies, at telling stories, at scripts that really just needed some more time in the oven, and some productions that needed more money. Yeah, episode 6. Got 3 movies on the list today. First one is Looking Glass, then USS Indianapolis Men of Courage, and then lastly, Pay the Ghost. So, got 3 movies up today. Let's go through them. I hear an aircraft. That is a Piper Archer TX. Interesting. Looking Glass. Looking Glass has the alternate title of Nicolas Cage plays a freaking creep. Okay, first of all, before I get into it, I'm not very good at the talking about a movie and then going into spoilers and then talking about the next movie and going into spoilers. So just consider the discussion of all these movies as having a high likelihood of spoilers being involved. So if you care at all about watching them, then you probably need to watch them before you hear me talk about it. But for the 3 that I'm looking at today, you're not going to be missing much. Nicolas Cage and his wife, they live in the city, and their daughter dies due to Cage being out of the home, cheating, and his wife being high on drugs. Daughter falls off the balcony. Terrible situation. So they move out of the city to try to start over, and they buy this old motel in a tiny desert town. They're from a Craigslist ad of all places. And so they move in. It's kind of weird when they move in because the previous owner just winds up like actually leaving town before they even get there. And he's acting all shady and weird about it. Naturally, they're kind of concerned, but they settle in. They clean up the place. They start noticing that their clients are kind of strange, kind of unique people. There's a big rig driver that keeps popping in and giving cash tips for no straightforward reason. So that's kind of weird. And then Cage quickly finds out that there is a tunnel made for being like a peeping Tom. It's built along the back of some of the motel rooms, and the main mirror in all the motel rooms is a 2-way mirror, and so he can crawl into the tunnel and see into the rooms, and they can't tell that there's someone there. I found out later this was apparently loosely based on an actual guy that had this set up at his motel. Cage finds out about this tunnel, but he doesn't tell anyone, not even his wife. And So he starts scoping out the motel more, and there's still some other weird patrons. And then while peeping on these two people in the hotel room, he sees their faces, he sees who they are, and then a couple days later, one of those people winds up dead. Then they come home one night after taking a day off and going to the casino. Cage's character and his wife come home, and there is a dead pig that's gutted floating in their pool, or in the motel pool. Understandably concerning. Cage, for some reason, takes out the pig, takes it out into the desert, burns it, doesn't tell anyone. That later creates grief with the local deputy, who's also a weird acting person who keeps coming by for coffee and talking to Cage in a weird way. Cage also finds out that someone had been murdered at the motel right before he came to look at it the first time. So a different person that recently got killed. So that freaks him out. Also, the previous owner has gone off the grid. No one can get in contact with him. The deputy keeps wanting to talk to him. So the tension in this thriller keeps building, and the dread and the just weird, uneasy feeling of Cage navigating this strange situation he finds himself in. The movie does a pretty good job of that. Other residents of the town have an eerie vibe to them, and so that certainly adds to the atmosphere. And not to retread every point of the story, but through more and more investigation and stuff, it eventually comes out that it's the deputy that killed the original girl, and he's been trying to get at Ben, and Cage winds up fighting the deputy to the death. Yeah, they live happily ever after. So all that to say, the movie has a pretty good premise, great premise. It does a good job at building an atmosphere and building a mood, but my primary problem with the movie is that it doesn't seize on the execution of the idea that it's trying to go after. There's a relatively few players in this little vignette, in this story. And because there's not a lot of players involved, your suspicions of who to suspect for who's doing all this nefarious stuff, you don't have that many choices. And so when it comes out that it is the deputy, at best you guessed him, and then at worst you thought, well, he's, like my second choice, my third choice. Kind of makes sense. So there's not enough extra factors at play to make the intrigue up to the level it needs to be for this film to work to its full potential, in my humble opinion. That being said, the film is competently shot. It's not like one of these direct-to-DVD shows that Cage has definitely done. And the cinematography ranges from adequate to pretty good. I thought Cage and his co-star, his wife in the movie, I thought they gave a good performance. The script really called, I guess, for a more understated approach. Cage, I thought, sold his character well. As far as Cage moments in the movie, not really. There's one or two moments that were maybe a slimmer of it. There's one point where the deputy is questioning Cage whether Cage did the original murder, and the deputy keeps asking him, did you do it? Did you do it? And Cage keeps responding, do what? Do what? It doesn't rise to the level of a Cage moment. That's not to say that a movie can't be good without a Cage moment, or that it can't rank highly on my list without a Cage moment, but it needs to have solid fundamentals and a solid execution in every other right if it wants to do well without a Cage moment. Unfortunately, Looking Glass does not deliver enough in other areas to score very well on my list without there being at least some points where they let Cage off the chain. Overall, it's an all-right movie, nothing special. I won't say forgettable. Some of these movies are forgettable, but this movie had a decent enough premise. I wouldn't call it forgettable. That being said, it doesn't live up to nearly the potential that it could be if some of the issues that I talked about were addressed. So, where do I rank this movie? Personally, I'm going to rank it above The Cotton Club and below Willy's Wonderland. The reason I put it there is because although The Cotton Club, great Cage moments, we just still didn't see enough of Cage to beat out this movie, which actually starred Cage. Meanwhile, this movie doesn't beat out Willy's Wonderland because although this movie was much more grounded in the fundamentals and delivered a more coherent and executed plot than Willy's Wonderland, it still ultimately was mediocre in bringing all those points together. That mediocreness meant that the couple of shining moments from Willy's Wonderland, primarily I'm thinking of the fight scenes, the fight sequences, those I think edge out Looking Glass in my ranking list. If you're wanting to see some classic Cage, some fun Cage, watch just an entertaining Cage movie, I think Willy's Wonderland is a little bit of a better choice than Looking Glass. USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage. I was actually surprised to find out that there hasn't been another film made about the USS Indianapolis. Apparently this is the only major movie that's been made about it. That's unfortunate because this movie's not very good. But I was surprised that this is really the only one that's where they've attempted to tell that story. In case you're unfamiliar, the story of the USS Indianapolis was a heavy cruiser that fought in World War II, and in July of 1945, it embarked on a high-speed, top-secret mission to deliver some of the components for one of the nuclear weapons that the United States was planning to drop on Japan. And since it was on a high-speed, top-secret mission, the details of its arrival and destination were pretty secret. As it's winding up its mission, it's heading to the Philippines for training duty, and on the 30th of July, it's hit by a torpedo from a Japanese submarine. The ship sank in 12 minutes, and of the 1,195 crewmen aboard, about 300 went down with the ship. The remaining 890 faced exposure, dehydration, saltwater poisoning, and most infamously, shark attacks while stranded in the ocean for about 4 days. Because of the top-secret nature of the USS Indianapolis's mission, the sinking of the ship was not immediately known to rescue personnel, and that's why they were out at sea for so long. Of the 890 that survived the original sinking, only 316 survived to be rescued. So naturally, a story of such historical significance and bravery and heroism, one would imagine that that's a fertile ground for a dramatic retelling. And you would be right, but unfortunately the group that went out and filmed this is not that guy. USS Indianapolis Men of Courage suffers from many things that make it a bad experience to watch. Some of those things include a lot of ADR. There were many incidences that showed where they tried to cut budgets. There's one point where the men are running down the ship as it's sinking, and there's flashes of lights, from the explosions. And at one flash of light, it reflected off of one of the gun turrets just right, and you could immediately tell that the gun turret was built out of plywood. You could see the grain of the plywood in the shot. A lot of the shots on the ship you could tell were a soundstage. That was unfortunate. The CGI was pretty bad too. CGI of the ship, of the Japanese submarine, of the sharks. It was all pretty bad. I'd put it at like a PlayStation 3 level of graphics. So yeah, not great. Another problem with this movie is they tried to introduce some of these side plots to run along the main plot of the ship. And I think the purpose of those were to provide some more interest, humanize the sailors some more, just flesh out the movie. But what it really did was distract from the main theme and just kind of felt ham-fisted and disjointed at times. The side plots did not find convincing whatsoever. It really subtracted from the movie. Another problem with this movie is that Cage, although he plays the captain, and although his role does become more prominent in the latter half of the movie where McVeigh is court-martialed and deals with the consequences of that. The fact remains that Cage does not remain the focus of this movie. He plays a secondary character ultimately, and a lot of time is spent on these other actors, these sailors and subplots that in a bigger budget, better written and better acted movie would have been fine, but in a movie this threadbare, I guess you could put it that way, it just exacerbated the cheapness and the level of uninterest I had in these other characters. Now, as far as Cage moments in this movie, there's not really any Cage moments that I can think of. There is one scene where he does kind of a goofy paddle on his raft, which they really just needed to like retake that shot. Like actual Cage moments, there's not really any in here. Again, because it's, a straight played historical drama. I think another thing that really hurts this movie, might be the thing that hurts it the most, is that there is such a clear chasm between what it was trying to be and what it actually was or is. Some Cage movies, you can tell they're not being super ambitious with it. They're just wanting to make an entertaining action flick, or, think of like The Old Way. The Old Way was trying to tell like some type of allegorical story, sort of, or teach The Old Way was trying to have some deeper themes and tell the story of these individual characters, but also set it on the backdrop of the overall evolution of the West and American civilization. And that's all well and good. It didn't quite achieve that in its execution, but it still achieved something reasonably approximate of what it was trying to do. USS Indianapolis Men of Courage missed so far off the mark of what it's trying to be. It was trying to be a very grand, compelling, historically accurate tale of the trials and tribulations and heroism of all these servicemen. But it just came out looking cheap and melodramatic and uninteresting. And that, like the chasm between what it is and the lofty goals that it aspired to, really just serves to magnify how inadequate the budget and the script and the acting were. So that's my problem with it. As far as rating it, so for USS Indianapolis Men of Courage, unfortunately, I'm going to have to rank it below A Score to Settle, but above The Kill Chain. And the reason I put it there is because A Score to Settle, although still a pretty bad movie, ultimately it does more so focus on Cage than USS Indianapolis Men of Courage. You get more Cage screen time, some more action and response of Cage's character with the world. That, I think, beats out the Indianapolis, since the Indianapolis spends so much time on other actors and other characters that I really couldn't bring myself to care too much about based on the way this movie was written. However, this does beat Kill Chain because Kill Chain was just obnoxiously bad. I did not enjoy that, and I could tolerate the Indianapolis again before I'd go through that. So that is where I rank USS Indianapolis Men of Courage. Last and final piece, Pay the Ghost. Pay the Ghost really is more like pay your script writer and producer more so that you can have a not as bad movie. Pay the Ghost follows Cage, who is playing a wannabe professor. I mean, he's teaching at a university, but he hasn't been tenured, I guess you could say, brought in as a full professor. And it's following him, and meanwhile, his wife and small kid, they both go long hours without seeing him, dinners and such without him. And so we set up that initial tension. Cage, to try to, make up some lost time, he takes his son to the carnival on Halloween. And as he's getting an ice cream or something, I forget, he turns his back just for a split second, turns back to his child, and his son's gone. And his wife is back home. Son's gone, he calls the police. They search everywhere, all over the city. Months go by. They can't find their son. So it's looking bad. And if they're coming up on Halloween again, and there's tension between Cage's character and his wife. She kind of blames him for losing the kid. And Cage begins to look into... Cage has this feeling that his son is reaching out to him in some supernatural way. And so he starts researching the supernatural. He eventually convinces his wife that his son is reaching out to them. And there's different supernatural things that start to happen in their house that become more and more intense. There might be a wind, a flipping of a page, and then there's a scooter that goes through the house, and then doors open and shut. And that's all well and good, but then they bring in a psychic. They bring in a psychic, and she starts walking around the house, and then she gets attacked by some wind spirit thing, throws her up against a wall, winds up killing her. So the movie jumps in intensity real quick. Then another professor gets killed doing some research. Cage goes into the slums and finds weird people that talk to him about spirits, and there's graffiti he sees, and a running theme throughout all this is that his son said, can we pay the ghost, before he disappeared. And Cage sees graffiti about paying the ghost, and other missing children that went missing around that same time talk about paying the ghost. That was their last words before leaving. Anyway, the supernatural stuff starts jumping through the roof. Cage and his wife run into some kind of Norwegian performer, Scandinavian performer, and she tells them about this spirit that kidnaps some children on Halloween and keeps them for a year. And if you don't get the children back before the next Halloween, or by the time the next Halloween ends, then they're gone forever. So then Cage and his wife go searching around, and Cage finds the portal back at the slum place, and he goes in and he finds his son amongst the half-dead children, and then he brings two others along with him, and then they fight the spirit, and the spirit chokes Cage, and then Cage fights back, and then the dead children somehow all come to his rescue. And then they make it back to the portal before midnight, and Cage makes it through with the son and then the other two children. Yeah, they survive. Yeah, if all that sounded kind of simplistic and felt like I was leaving stuff out, I really didn't leave that much out. It was, pretty simple when you back up and look at it. And I don't know. This movie was an attempt at doing a realistic supernatural horror thriller, I guess. But it suffers from the problem of ratcheting up the supernatural element way too hard, really fast, and it just made it laughably unbelievable. And it didn't really do that in a suspenseful, scary way. Instead, the scares it relied on were the cheap jump scares. And, jump scares are fine. I don't have a problem with them, but they need to be earned. And these were just stupid jump scares. Cage is poking and looking at a window, and then a ghoulish face jumps out with a loud noise and flashing lights, and then it goes away. That's cheap stuff. That's child's play. There was a lot of exposition in this movie trying to explain the ghost and the backstory of the ghost and the portal and where the children are. And maybe this is just me, but I didn't find the whole ghost storyline compelling. If you're going to make something supernatural, to me at least, you need to have an interesting spin on it, because just the idea that there's a demon out to get the children, that's not enough in my book. You need to have some type of interesting twist to make it more than just a scary story to tell at bed. But this movie, when you back up and look at it, it was just scary demon from the past, kidnaps children on Halloween, and happened to kidnap Cage's child. And it interferes in very violent, physical, undeniable ways in the current world that we live in major metropolitan areas. I don't know. I didn't find it compelling. The movie just seemed to march on in a dreary fashion in a way that I didn't find interesting. Now, this movie could save itself with some Cage moments, but it did not. Cage, I thought, did a good job at playing the role he was, assigned to play in this. Some of it felt a little wooden. I mean, he did all right. Nothing special. The movie isn't bad because of Cage. No real Cage moments, like I said. His fight with the spirit was not an interesting fight. It was more just a plot-moving fight. One thing that I want to note about this movie, so generally speaking, when I watch these Cage movies, I try not to look at any reviews for the movies before I film my video. My thought process is I don't want to inadvertently color my thoughts on the movie. I just want to give my raw opinion of it. But on this movie, I accidentally, while I was researching it, I happened upon like 2 or 3 one-sentence reviews. And I found a quote by this guy. Let's see if I can pull this up. And his name is Brian Tallarico. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Regarding Pay the Ghost, Brian Tallarico said that this movie was, quote, a new low for Nicolas Cage. And he called it a lazy, boring retread of Insidious. Mr. Tallarico, I haven't seen Insidious, so I don't know if this is a lazy, boring retread of that. But what I do know, this movie is bad. It's not great, but there is no way, absolutely no way that this is a new low for Cage. Look at Industrial Symphony No. 1, A Dream for the Brokenhearted. This is not a great movie, but to call this a new low for Cage is to just demonstrate an incredible ignorance of the Cage discography. Even though I've only seen, we're on episode 6, there's like 15, I guess, movies I've seen, give or take. I know for a fact that there are other movies down the road that are going to be worse than this movie. This movie is not great, but to call it a new low is just bonkers. It's crazy. Like, seriously, it's genuinely uninformed to call this movie a new low for Nicolas Cage. It is categorically incorrect. You are fake news, Brian Tallarico.
You are fake news. Go ahead.
As far as where it lands on our hollowed list, I believe I'll have to place it 3rd from the bottom, just above Kill Chain and just below USS Indianapolis. Although this focuses on Cage far more than USS Indianapolis, it's more interesting to watch Cage's portion of the USS Indianapolis than it is to watch this movie. But again, you're looking at different degrees of poop here. So I'm saying this poop's browner than that poop. If you think that poop is a little bit browner than that poop, I really can't fault you too much. We're just dealing with different shades of brown here. It's all bad. But I'm afraid that does it for this episode, ladies and gents. Episode 6 of the Nicolas Cage-athon. So we had Looking Glass, we had USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, and we had Pay the Ghost. Mid to bad movies this time around. Emphasis on the bad. Slowly making our way through the vast, uncharted depths of the Nicolas Cage discography. As always, I really appreciate you watching this video. Any likes, any comments are very appreciated. If you haven't already, be sure to click that subscribe button down there and the little bell notification. And that about winds up this video. I will see you next time. This is Raw Egg Slim going over and out.